Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. Fire. That was the one thing the combined forces of Iowa, Kumo and Kiri first saw when they neared the Isles of Uzu no Kuni. In all their lives they had never seen such an amount of the flames burst forth on a battlefield. Yet when they saw the entire Isle of Uzu no Kuni suddenly lit ablaze with a giant barrier of dark red flames engulfing the outer edges of the isle, they knew something had gone wrong. That's when they saw it, a sight that chilled them to the bone. It was a man walking on the water directly out from the flames. Long spiky gold hair billowed in the air as the glow from the flames lit up his noble features for their eyes to see. He looked like some form of a noble, maybe a daimyo, and yet the balanced stroll he gave amongst the hundreds of ships each carrying 100 or more shinobi, and the stoic aura he gave off was unnerving. That's when they saw the blade he held at his side, engulfed in fire, causing the waters around him to boil from just the intense heat it gave off. Who was this man? Why was he here? And better yet, how did he have so much power? Naruto looked upon the ships coming toward him with the intent to reach Uzu no Kuni, and those that got past him were instantly incinerated by the flames of his barrier. His eyes scanned the vast ocean before him to see the number of ships until he let out an exhale. He brought up his katana, and as he stared at his weapon engulfed in dark red flames, letting its beautiful glow smolder in his azure eyes. How long has it been since I experienced your flames? Too long it would seem, he said as he gazed outward. Nevertheless, let's get rid of the trash. Bringing up his katana, the flames instantly vanished as he sheathed the blade. However, as he gripped the blade, he planted his foot forward, and spoke. Hitatsume. Nadagiri, and just before the first ship could come into contact with his body, Naruto moved, pulling out his katana. He swung, and the next second Naruto was walking toward the next wave of ships, and just as he sheathed his katana. Click. Crash. Ah. The shouts of dying shinobi sounded just before the first wave of ships were instantly sliced in half along with the entire ocean. It was as if a giant blade had come down upon them as a giant slash went down on multiple ships, slicing them completely in half, along with any shinobi in contact were pulled into it as well. Those that weren't were pulverized as their respective ships were crushed as the ocean itself split open, swallowing them whole as they were crushed by the 1,000 gallons of sea water coming down on them. The Oda paid no attention to this, however, as he went towards the second wave of ships. His azure stared down the next row of ships with little to no emotion whatsoever. The shinobi, on the other hand, could only look on in horror from their own ships at what just transpired. To see their first battalion of ships decimated with a single attack was mind-blowing, and all from just one man. One Kumo nin could only stare as the noble-looking man walked toward them. What is he? He uttered just before he saw his commander walk toward the edge of the ship. It matters not what he is. He is an obstacle in our path, and as such must be taken down, and as commander of the 2nd Battalion I am issuing a full offensive attack. And with the order given, he along with the shinobi aboard his in the second row of ships jumped from the ship, and dashed toward Naruto. Said blonde merely watched as the hundreds of shinobi jumped ship, and charged his way. Though he didn't give much of a flinch at the sheer number, he raised an eyebrow when he saw a few do-hand signs, and with the final one complete he saw 3 shinobi jump up from the charging shinobi. Raiden. Jion. The first shinobi before he unleashed a bolt of lightning from his hands toward Naruto. Doden. Dosekiryu. Aiwa Kunoichi shouted, causing a giant dragon of earth to erupt from the water from the sea floor before it rushed towards the stationary Oda. Sweden. Sushoha. A Kiri nin declared before his cheeks swelled up before he released a giant vortex of water which gained in strength from the ocean as it hurled itself toward the blonde. With the 3 jutsus coming down on him, the blonde merely glanced their way before he looked back at the shinobi. If this is all you can do, then I am sorely disappointed. His words confused them until Naruto put out his palm to the 3 jutsus, and only uttered a single phrase. Bakudo number 8. Seiki. Boom. The shinobi could only watch in slight fascination and horror as a transparent blue orb appeared at the palm of the blonde's hand before it grew in size. Then as the jutsus collided with it, they were not only blocked, but they were repelled back to the shinobi. The shinobi in the area reacted in time to jump out of the way, but some were not as lucky as the jutsus hit them while colliding with a few others. What was that? A shinobi said, only to freeze when he felt an oppressive presence come up from behind him. He turned around only to see Naruto's azure eyes staring him down. Soon an immense pressure started to come down on them all, causing some to fall to their knees as a red glow started to surround the Oda's body. There's no time for second guessing in war, boy. Now perish from my sight. And before they knew what happened next, the blonde flicked out his katana, causing an intense amount of flames to engulf his blade before he sent out a wave of fire upon them all. The giant wave of fire pushed forth, incinerating all in its path, pulling in the ships too close in proximity of the wave of fire. As his robed form billowed out from the intense heat waves, Naruto narrowed his eyes as he saw the next row of ships come crashing through the fiery ruins of the second. However, among them his eyes caught two shadows jumping from the ship, and then the blonde stepped to the side. Splash. Well, you're very fast to dodge me, that's for certain, a man commented, causing Naruto glance at his side to see his latest attackers. It was two men, with one of them being a very tall dark-skinned man with a very well-defined muscular build. His eyes were a unique shade of green-colored irides, white sclerae, and with no defining pupils to show. He had dark blonde upper back length hair with a black bandana covering the top of his hair and with a shoulder-length beard to match. He wore the standard Kumogakure distinctive shoulder strap flak jacket with no clothing underneath. Tied around his waist was a thick rope, while on down he wore black pants and black shinobi sandals. The second man was completely wrapped in gray bandages with only his unique violet-colored eyes and nose visible. He wore a dark blue headband with no distinctive markings for all to see. Strapped to his back in AX formation was two swords, while over his bandages chest was a Iwagakure chest guard, while over his left arm was a distinctive black sleeve. He wore no shoes. Eyes for his feet were also bandages heavily. Naruto rose an eyebrow as he sensed the power from the two were easily much higher than the shinobi he faced prior. He turned toward them as the two stood a few feet from him, and he looked from the tall man to the bandaged one with an impassive gaze. It would seem we were misinformed, Raikage-san, the bandages man said as he prepared himself whilst he warily eyed the noble-looking man who at first glance looked powerless, but after seeing the destruction he wrought he was right to be cautious. The man called Raikage seemed to give a scoff as he too eyed Naruto with a frown, even as his aura lit up with an aura of lightning. That we have, it would seem. Either we've been tricked or that old monkey didn't know that there would be a man of this power among the Uzumaki. He said just before he and the bandages man tense when Naruto placed his hands into the sleeves of his robes as he stared the two down with a quirked eyebrow. Though he kept their words noted down in the back of his head, he would focus on these two for now. Are you two quite done? He asked in a casual manner, and seeing that they had went silent, the Oda seemed satisfied. Good. We're in a war, and words mean nothing on the battlefield except for the names of those that I deem suited to at least meet me in combat, so tell me, young warriors, what are your names? He said, causing the two to share a tense glance between one another before they looked back at the blonde. Very well, I am the Sandaime Raikage Z. The dark-skinned man introduced himself before his body lit up with bolts of lighting engulfing his body as his hair spiked outwards. I am the Naruto Kage, Mew, the bandaged man said before he got into a crouch. His hands soon started to glow a transparent white. Naruto easily took in the two titles' names before he gave a nod. Good. And before the two Kages knew what happened, the blonde vanished. What the? Z sputtered just before the blonde appeared right in front of him, and before he could react, the blonde slammed his first fist into abdomen. Then pain. Untold amounts of pain erupted from Z's abdomen, causing the oxygen within him to burst out from his lungs as his eyes popped open in shock. He quickly jumped back from the man as he stared at Naruto's fist with shock. Such strength. He bypassed my Raiden no Yoroi, and even then it felt as he broke a few ribs, he thought in surprise before he glanced up to see Naruto look down at his hand. I felt a slight tingle. He commented just before Mew appeared above him as he unsheathed both swords upon his back. Then he swung intending to cut off the Ota's head, but the blonde was a step ahead of him as just ducked before he grabbed his sheath before he slammed the butt end of his sheath into Mew's abdomen causing him to grunt. Then once he touched the water's surface he swirled around the blonde so that he was standing side by side with Z. I wonder how he's faring, Z said as rubbed his abdomen to ease his aching ribs, and yep, he could feel a few ribs were broken from that single punch. He winced a bit as he and Mew eyed the blonde man with a more in-depth gaze. TCH, hopefully he dies, Mew uttered with a small scowl of annoyance whilst Z just gave him a blank stare. Can't you for once set aside your differences and work together? He said, and just before Mew could respond they both found a shadow hovering above them causing to look up to see Naruto staring them down. I don't believe you have the time to talk amidst a battle. Mew cursed. Boom. Uzushiogakure waterways. Your family has been safely hidden away Uzukage Dono, the shinobi said Kage said as they appeared at his side. Behind said Kage was the entire shinobi force of Uzu no Kuni. The Uzukage himself just gave the shinobi a nod whilst he looked forward a narrowed gaze from the rim of his cage hat. The waterways of the Uzushiogakure were a system built to filter the water from the ocean that went through Uzu no Kuni through the village. It was their main power supply as the tides generated from the ocean and the whirlpools that surrounded Uzu no Kuni always came through this one river which they used as a form of hydropower. With numerous amounts of tide mills installed along both the entrance and exit of both waterways they generated a good amount of electricity for just the village itself. It was their main source of power for the village's electricity, but it was also a very good place for a potential enemy to come in through. However, no one knew of the entry points besides those who laid the foundations of Uzushiogakure, the Uzukage, and the clan heads. The Uzukage frowned at where his thoughts were going. The evidence was becoming more and more obvious to who the traitor was. First, Konoha abandons his daughter in the midst of a Kumo ambush. Second, the only ones to know the secret of bypassing the whirlpools surrounding Uzu no Kuni were fellow Uzumaki with a lick of true Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, and Konoha had an Uzumaki already in their village. However, he found it near impossible for her to ever relay that information to them. Third and last of all was as he was staring at the forces of Kiri coming out from the entrance of the waterway was how their secret entrances were being compromised. Konoha didn't know them, and yet they were the most likely suspect to betraying them after having a near-long century alliance with them, so they were the only ones to know of anything about their village. So what happened for them to get this knowledge, or better yet, why betray them now? Never mind that, I'll deal with it later, for now, was the Uzukage's thought as he narrowed his eyes upon the man standing in front of Kiri forces who was obviously the leader. I would never have thought we would battle one another, Hazuka Maida, or should I say, Mizukage-san. The Uzumaki clan head said as he stared upon the Mizukage with a studious gaze. Unlike his fellow Uzumakis, he remained perfectly still whilst he looked upon the cage. The man in question smirked. He had a pale complexion with a tall yet slender build. He had relatively long dark blonde hair that was swept back in a combed-down style. His eyes were a unique shade of turquoise while he had a thin mustache with no eyebrow along with two very prominent lines going down the sides of his mouth. The man wore a long gray robe with a pin-striped pattern while under this he wore a dark blue full-body suit while around his waist was a dark blush sash and black shinobi sandals. Mita's smirk grew in size as he stared back into the cold eyes of the Uzukage. But then again, I never that I would have the honor to face you myself. We came here with all the leaders of our villages to take you and your clan out, but it would seem that honor shall be mine. After all, it's been aspiration of mine to face the man who slaughtered the entire Kage clan, am I right, Uzumaki Kenshin of the Shi no Kanshoku? He said, causing the Uzukage to narrow his eyes before he looked to see a Kiri nin coming up to Maida. Mizukage Dono, it would seem our path behind us is blocked off by a giant wall of fire. He finished hesitantly, causing Maida to raise an eyebrow before he heard the Uzukage give a chuckle. It would seem my comrade is dealing with the main invading force. Good, that leaves me and my clansmen the task of dealing with you, and I don't plan you show you a shred of mercy, Maida. And with that said, the atmosphere grew extremely heavy upon Maida as the Uzumaki head shed his robes to reveal his armor beneath it. It was fashioned in the armor from shinobi of old, where the armor itself was pitch black while underneath he wore a dark red full-body suit. Over his arms were a pair of arm guards with steel plating, while on his head he wore the Uzumaki headband proudly. With his body revealed, the man stood a good 6 feet with his long red hair falling down his mid-back whilst his mustache fell just short below his chin. He had a very well-defined muscular build, but not enough to be too bulky to get in the way of his overall strength and speed. Finally etched into the back of his armor was the symbol for the Uzumaki clan. Bringing out his hand, a seal glowed from the palm of his, causing Mita's eyes to widen as Kenshin stared him down. Now come and face the wrath of the Uzumaki clan, he said before the seal glowed brighter. Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Ryu no Hoko. The seal from his hand glowed before it unraveled from his hand in a mystical glow as the seal came in a transparent fashion before it unleashed a giant ball of fire which hurled itself toward Maida and his forces, and this caused Maida to scowl before he brought up his hands before doing a set of hand seals. Sweden. Mizorapa. Breathing in, Mita's cheeks swelled up before he unleashed a giant torrent of water which soon collided with the fireball. HSST. Both attacks some dissipated while the result of the clash soon created a steamy veil of fog which blanketed the entire area. Looking out, Maida narrowed his eyes before they widened when he found Kenshin just sheer inches from him. Cold brown eyes met surprised turquoise before Kenshi merely planted his palm into the Mizukage's abdomen. And the fight begins, Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, Shogekiha. That's all Maida heard before his abdomen glowed a bright white before a seal formed across his stomach. Then he felt his hearing pop, his vision blurred as his body was propelled through the air by some unseen force. That was the spark that ignited the two forces to collide as both Uzu and Kiri forces charged in a war cry. Uzushiogakure shelters. The shelters built into Uzushiogakure were well built into the underground systems of the village itself. Built during the village's construction, it was made specifically for clansmen that couldn't partake in the battle to seek shelter, and in case of an emergency it had an underground tunnel that would lead them directly under the island, and under the sea where it would lead them on the mainland. The shelter itself was one large chamber built in a dome-like fashion to fit for a mass number of people. It was here, however, as the shelter trembled with each earth-pounding force that most of the Uzumaki clansmen were hidden away. Most of them were the elderly from various ages, while others the rest parents and their children. Among them was 3 other Uzumakis huddled up against the wall. Among the 3 was Kushina herself. The young girl held a frown of worry as the chamber shook. She looked to her side to see the 2 others with her. The first was a girl about her age who looked like her twin in almost everything except for a few differences. Her hair was a bright shade of scarlet red that fell to her mid-back, while her bangs covered most of her forehead with 2 longer bangs framing both sides of her face. Her eyes were that of a brown shade, and like Kushina she too wore garbs fit for a kunoichi. She wore the traditional Uzu kunoichi garb consisting of a red-sleeved shirt which covered her maturing chest, while on the left shoulder it held the Uzumaki symbol. She wore black trousers that were just below her knees, while on her feet she wore blue shinobi sandals. Finally tied around her right shoulder was the Uzu headband. This girl was in fact her twin sister Uzumaki Urza, and like her was a genin of Uzushiogakure, but more importantly the second heiress to the Uzumaki clan. And I keep telling you we should go out there, and fight too, she said, the third person who merely gave a melodic chuckle. Kushina's sweat dropped a little at her sister's attitude. She probably had the same attitude as her. Then she looked to the third person, an older woman in her mid-30s at least. Her hair was the same shade as Urza's as it fell to her lower back, while a lone bang fell over her left eye with the end curving slightly, but her eyes were the same shade of violet as her own. This woman had the build of a kunoichi, but motherhood had only enhanced her beautiful features to make her look simply extravagant. Unlike the 2 younger girls, she wore a crimson kimono with white shirt and hakama underneath. The kimono was decorated with a number of flowery designs, while on the back of said kimono was the Uzumaki symbol as well, but the flowery designs all contributed into the swirling vortex of the insignia upon her back. This was Kushina and Urza's mother, Uzumaki Karara, matriarch of the Uzumaki clan. "You're still a bit too young to go fighting in a war, Chan," their mother said as she pat Urza on the head, causing her to give a small pout at still being treated like a child. She was a genin, damn it. "Still, it doesn't sit well with me to leave Tu-san and everyone else out there while we have to wait here underground," she said. "I know, Masumi, but don't forget your Tu-san is one of the most powerful Uzumaki in the history of our clan. Besides, he is fighting alongside the clansmen to defend our home, so there is no need to worry, he will be fine," she assured the scarlet-haired Uzumaki, who just sighed at her mother's smile. She just couldn't beat her mother when she smiled at her like that. "Will this place hold though?" Kushina said, commenting on the fact the dome shuddered as another force of power shook its structure. Karara just kept a smile on her face as she looked upon the dome crafted by their ancestors' hands. "Do no worry, Kushi-chan, this place is the marvel crafted from our ancestors' hands. It is the fruits of their hard-earned labor that created this place. So no small amount of some simple siege will break it, trust me on this," she said with a wink before she gained a mischievous twinkle in her eye when she saw the worried look in her daughter's eye. "Oh, and why do you look so worried, Masumi? You know your father is just fine, so could it be about that man I heard about saving you from the Kumo Nin?" Karara's face went positively fox-like when she saw Kushina's eyes shot wide open in shock as her face snapped in her direction, but the way her face went beet red was fact enough. Urza blinked before she eyed her sister in suspicion. She remembered what Kushina told her and their mother on what happened, and she would be lying to not wanting to meet and thank the man who saved her sister. However, to see this reaction from her fellow twin was a surprise to be sure, because she was more of tomboy than even herself, so to see her blush like that must have meant only one thing. This guy had to be special to make Kushina act that way, and because of that Urza wanted to meet him for herself. "Ka-chan," Kushina whined pitifully as she tried to push down her blush, but Karara just gave a giggle. Still, that didn't mean Karara wasn't curious to the identity of her daughter's savior, and from what little Kushina said, he was an interesting guy, seeing as he woke up in some kind of tomb. Her violet eyes narrowed when she felt the wall behind her tremble, causing her to close her eyes. "There's a foreign energy source on the shores of the island, and whoever it is facing against the full invasion force. Plus the fact the source is facing off against two others with extremely large chakra capacity fit for a cage. This has to be the same man who saved Kushina." Opening her eyes, Karara let out a smirk as she glanced toward Kushina with a happy expression. "Whoever it is, it seems you've found yourself a very interesting friend, Masumi." "Karara dono." An Uzu shinobi came to the woman's side with a nervous expression, causing her to raise an eyebrow. "Yes, what is it?" The man just glanced from the way he came before whispering into her ear. "We have intruders. It seems a toad and snake are trying to infiltrate this shelter," he said, causing Karara's eyes to narrow before she gave him a nod. "It seems the leaves are trying to shroud its strangling roots." "Very well." With a simple hand gesture, Karara placed her free hand against the wall behind her, causing a seal to appear before the secret exit was quickly closed off before a great rumbling sounded beneath them. She got many looks from other Uzumaki, but she just gave a serene smile to them all, and just answered the unasked question. "Don't worry, just washing away some strays that got caught up in the drain." They all sweat dropped at how sadistic that smile looked. Such a serene expression combined with a smile like that, it had to be breaking laws to have smile like that. Kushina and Urza glanced from their mother to one another, and shuddered for a moment. "Ka-chan is scary. With Naruto. This man, is he a demon?" Mew commented as he and Z stood a few feet away from Naruto. They'd been fighting for a good hour, and yet he nor Z had even landed a single hit on the stoic blonde. Truly, Naruto's body was unmarred without a single scratch on his body, not even his clothing was singed or torn in any place. However, the same could not be said for the two respective Kages. When they first started fighting Naruto, they thought somewhere deep in their mind that they had the advantage in number. However, that was blown out the window with how the blonde was easily keeping up with the both of them, fighting them both off with so much ease it was as if he was fighting off children. Mew had suffered numerous amount of wounds, causing his bandage's body to bleed profusely. His headband was long gone, whilst his left arm hung limply due to his shoulder being broken. His right eye was closed shut as blood leaked out due to a near-invisible attack on the blonde's part that nearly took out his eyes. Luckily enough, it only scarred his right eye, however it was enough to close that eye off. Z, on the other hand, was bleeding from the mouth while most of his body was overwhelmed with multiple bruises, black whelps and even a few fist indentions in his body. His left arm was completely shattered whilst his abdomen had a sickly shade of purple showing. He put a hand to his chest as he eyed the stoic blonde with a look of caution. I honestly don't know what he is, and the fires surrounding Uzu no Kuni have halted the rest of the ships from advancing. Whatever the case, we must keep trying. And Mew could only nod before did a set of one-handed seals. What else do you have to show for, sons of the sage? Naruto commented before he saw the bandaged man finish his seals before speaking. Doden. Shanusaki. And soon the blonde felt a rumbling beneath him before he saw 10 giant boulders rise up from the sea as they surrounded his body, causing him to raise eyebrow. They swirled around him before they shot inward, intent on crushing his body. Giving a sigh, the Oda closed his eyes just as the boulders were closing in. Once they were within range, he flicked out his katana, cutting them all into pieces until bits of earth passed by him harmlessly. Then he heard the sound of lighting from above him. Raiden. Kuropansa. Z shouted before a giant panther made of jet black lighting shot down from its skyward position. As it came down, Naruto raised his hand just in time for the panther to come into contact with his palm. It can't be possible, Z thought in shock as he saw something he'd thought to be impossible. Naruto was halting the panther in its tracks, and guiding his hand he redirected it back at the shocked Raikage, and being caught off guard by the redirection, the man could only pull up his arms as his own jutsu backfired on him. Gah! He grunted as his own attack electrified him whilst Mew just looked on in surprise. Black lighting was a special type of lightning that was said to be extremely volatile to the touch, and if not handled correctly could hurt the user as well, even them. And yet this one blonde man had not only caught it, but redirected it back to the Raikage himself. How? He uttered, causing Naruto just raise an eyebrow. It's very simple. No matter how different it is, lightning is at its very core a simple result of an electrostatic discharge, and thus I can absorb it into my body and then release it back in a redirection of my choosing before it can cause any harmful effects on my own body, he said, as if it was a simple manner of redirecting one of nature's most powerful elements. Mew could only stare in bewilderment, and a bit of apprehension at how this man had just explained something that had been in theory for years in a couple of seconds. It was official, this man was extremely dangerous. Naruto just stared at the two before he putting out his palm, causing Mew to tense as Naruto called. Hado number 31. Shakaho, and soon a bright red orb formed in his palm before he held it in, causing it to shrink in size, and once it reached the size of an apple it released a small shockwave, causing the water beneath him to ripple. His hand started to glow as he aimed it directly toward the two. There it is again. That's ninjutsu, but so much destructive power, what form of attack is that? Mew thought before the orb shot from Naruto's hand. Thinking quickly, he did a few hand seals before he jumped towards Z's body as he activated the jutsu. Boom! The orb glowed white before it unleashed a giant red beam that incinerated everything in its path. Its path swung from right to left, causing the entire fleet of ships hit by it to explode in a fiery blaze of hellfire. It finally dissipated when the blonde released it into the sky, causing it to wisp away in beams of red energy. Idly the blonde looked down at his hand, and frowned. Has all my time spent sleeping put a lack of control over my power, or has it increased all these years? A few feet from his location he looked to see you with a slightly recovered Z appearing through the water's surface, but the shell-shock faces they wore was plain to see. After all, they'd just witnessed the last of their fleet demolished by one attack. The destruction was there for them to see. At what was once their fleet was now a fiery graveyard of sinking ships, of where once a force of 3 shinobi villages banded together now lay in shambles. That looked like a Biju Zamari, only on a far more destructive scale. What is this man? Was the thoughts of the Tsuchikage. Z, on the other hand, regained his footing and stared dead straight at the impassive blonde before glancing at Mew. I have an idea, but you have to keep him occupied. Think you can do that? Mew just looked back at Z for just a moment before he gave a small nod. Though if he was honest with himself, this entire invasion was looking to be a failed operation because the majority of their force was just destroyed. However, there was a new urge growing within him, and that was to try and this clearly very dangerous man before he was set loose upon the rest of the world, cause if he was. Mew feared for the worst. I'll get him, but make sure whatever you're doing it best be something that can take him out, he said, only making the man just scoff as his right hand started to crackle with lightning. Don't worry, it will. Naruto raised an eyebrow as the two got ready, but he just stood where he was as he waited for them to make the first move. That's when he saw Mew thrown down smoke bombs blanketing the air around them in a black smoke. The Oda merely frowned when his two foes vanished from his sight, and amidst the raging crackling of fire of burning ships, and the fire surrounding the island, all went silent for the briefest of moment. Hiding now, are we? Cheap parlor tricks won't work. His ears perked up before he leaned his head to left, dodging a few kunai which hit the water, but his eyes caught sight of a few pieces of paper sizzling before they plunged into the water. Boom! The water exploded from beneath him, causing him to jump to the side, and right then he looked down once he felt the water rumble beneath him. Doden. Ritsudo Tensho. Mew's voice sounded from within the area before the water itself split open to reveal all the way down the sea floor, rupturing. That's the water started to swirl, caused by the hole in the sea floor. Shaking his head, merely jumped only for his gaze to look up to see Mew above him. Dai. Futon. Datapa, he said as he finished a set of hand seals, and instantly a giant gust of wind shot down on Naruto, pressing him down into the whirlpool, but he just sighed before he vanished from sight. This caused Mew to widen high eyes before he looked around, only for him to feel a presence behind him. Be more aware of your surroundings. Before he could react, a fist planted itself into side, sending him flying from out of the smoke-filled area. That's when Naruto's eyes widened slightly when he felt a presence come up from behind him. Kuroikazuki. Jigokuzuke. Z's voice sounded, and Naruto spun around just in time for him to see Z's eyes glaring back at him with his entire body engulfed in black lightning. Boom! The surrounding area exploded in a giant pillar of water whilst a shockwave pulsed outward, causing waves to form. Soon enough, gravity took its course, and the water came back down into a heavy rain, and among that rain Naruto and Z's form could be seen through the heavy downpour. However, something was unusual as Z's limbs seemed to be stretching out toward Naruto's body, and that's when it was fully revealed. I am possible. What are you? Z stuttered out as he stared in complete shock at what he was seeing. It was his right arm stopped in its tracks while his hand was coated in a thick veil of blue chakra, and pure black lightning. However, it was the hand gripping his wrist that bewildered him, and caused him to glance up to the cold eyes of his blonde foe. Was that your best? Was that all you had? Was all that just to have you try to me, with this? He said, gripping Z's wrist, causing him to wince as the monstrous grip he had on him. He kept gripping his wrist, causing him to fall to a single knee whilst he gave a grunt of pain. Single quote, comma dot. This feeble technique is useless against me. Now drown in your failure, child of the sage. And with a twitch of his hand. Crack. Gah. Z's grit his teeth in pain as the blonde let go of his broken wrist. He looked up into the unforgiving azure orbs of his foe with a frown. Now what will you do, I wonder? Naruto commented, only to raise an eyebrow when a pain-filled smirk formed on Z's face. I was afraid of doing this, but seeing as my best technique can do nothing to you, then perhaps his can, he said, causing Naruto to frown. That's when Z's closed his eyes and willed lightning into his body, causing his nerve clusters within his arms to twitch before he jumped forward. He wrapped his arms around Naruto's body, causing him to raise both eyebrows before he shouted, "Do it now." Glancing upwards, he saw Mew floating in the air with palms put forward with a glowing white transparent cylindrical-like shape. It grew in size before Mew's eyes narrowed down on the two. Jinten. Genkei Hakuri no Jutsu. And once the cage released, it came down on the two which surrounding them in a transparent cylinder. However, Naruto just narrowed his eyes as the glowing center started to close in on him. So one of the Rakudo's more advanced techniques is known today. It will do them no good though. Azure eyes started to smolder before the epicenter of his eyes glowed an even deeper shade of blue. Soon his body started to give off a deep blue shade much darker than that of Chakra's own color, and soon it came to the point Z's arms started to burn before his flesh caught on fire. "If you think this can take me out, then you're sadly mistaken," he said. Let me out, Mew. Z's let go before Mew willed out a small escape for Z, letting him dive into the water as the flames burned and scorned his body, but still Naruto remained at his body started to steam before a flicker of one crimson flame appeared. Then the technique closed in around him with only one phrase being uttered. Kojin no Kuroku. Then the technique closed in, however it stopped when a bright red glow erupted from within, causing the technique to implode in a fiery blaze. It soon started to slowly deteriorate particle by particle as Naruto, cloaked in crimson red flames, walked out of the failed attack. Azure eyes glanced up to the wide and fearful ones of Mew before Naruto brought up his hand, brushed it aside, causing the flames engulfing his body to wisp away into the air. "How did you?" Mew uttered, causing Naruto to just shake his head before he appeared in front of the bandages man. Then his hand struck, grabbing him by the neck in an iron grip, and narrowed his azure eyes on him. "Fire destroys everything, boy. Nothing is excluded from this. From the biggest of objects down to the smallest particle, even dust is something fire can burn." Mew's eyes widened before Naruto threw the cage's body away, causing him to plummet into the water. Then as the two cages started to emerge from the watery depths, they could only look up as Naruto floated from above, causing the Tsuchikage's eyes to widen. Was the blonde able to even fly like him? If this is all the best of this era can offer in terms of combat, then I'm most displeased, he said, putting his arms into his robes and as gazed down on the two defeated cages. His blonde hair billowed in the wind before he spoke again as he addressed them with a cold glare. Single quote, comma dot. "Perish from my sight." And just as his hand ignited in a ball of flames, but just as he was about to set them loose. Ding. The Oda's eyes narrowed when he felt a tremor in the spiritual realm around him. Then he looked to where he felt the source to see it coming from the island itself. Not sparing another glance, he willed the ball of fire from his hand before putting his hand back in his sleeve before he started to walk back to the island with his back to the two down cages. "Leave. I am no longer in the mood to prolong this fight, so if you wish to survive, I suggest you get out of my sight," he said, causing the two to scowl, but just before they left, Z had to ask as he eyed the katana on the mont's hip. "Before we leave, just answer this one question. Why didn't you use your katana?" he said as he and Mew witnessed the total destruction the man wrought upon their fleet with that single blade. The fire and flames he let off from that blade were at best abnormal, for they were just too strong to be normal, and the intensity they held seemed to even burn the air around them. Naruto glanced over his shoulder before he kept walking. "I'm not obliged to answer your question since neither of you proved to even be a certified warm-up. Now leave before I decide to change my mind." And with that he kept left whilst the two cages vanished from the battlefield. And thus as Naruto walked back to the island, he brushed his hand aside, causing the barrier of fire to dissipate into the air, leaving the island of Uzu no Kuni undamaged. Looking up at the island, the blonde only had one thing in mind now. To find out what his clan had left behind during his absence. Earlier Kenshin vs. Maida. Hazuka Maida was really starting to regret ever agreeing to go and invade Uzu no Kuni. Perhaps it was blind ignorance that led him to believe that if he combined forces with Kumo and Iwa they would have easily taken Uzu no Kuni and destroyed Uzushiogakure without consequence. Perhaps he was arrogant in thinking they could defeat a village, a sole clan that threatened the entire elemental nations without a vast number of casualties on their own side. Or perhaps it was pride that led Maida to believe that he could finally take on the infamous Uzumaki clan and its head without so much as a true severe number of death tolls on his side. Now he was regretting ever agreeing to invade Uzu no Kuni because as he was keeping himself barely standing he had to watch as his most powerful of forces were destroyed before his eyes. Every Uzu shinobi that fought was easily keeping up, and was easily taking out his own men with their fuinjutsu-based combat, ninjutsu prowess and most of all their effectiveness against repelling genjutsu. Maida coughed up a glob of blood before he looked down at his body, and winced at how damaged he really was. He could feel fractures in both his left shoulder and right kneecap. His entire body was riddled with wounds due to the unique combat style of his opponent causing him to bleed profusely. When he heard steps among the fight he looked up to see Kenshin coming towards him, and though the clan head had suffered a few injuries he still looked ready to go on for much longer. "What's wrong, Maida? Where did your spirit go? Have you finally realized what you've stepped into?" Kenshin said as walked towards him. His armor was dented in a few areas while a part of the chest was blown off by Mita's Joki Boy technique which thankfully he was able to entrap, and seal it before it could cause any further damage to his clansmen or the waterway. However, Kenshin, unlike his foe, was still rearing to go thanks to his longevity from his Uzumaki heritage. His body could endure much more punishment than that of a normal mortal. Even life-threatening wounds couldn't stop an Uzumaki, and that is what made him and the rest of his clan so respected and so very dangerous on a battlefield. As he stopped just a few feet from Maida he looked down on the Mizukage with smoldering brown orbs that pierced Mita's very soul. "Are you ready to submit and yield defeat?" he questioned Maida, who just narrowed his eyes before he swiped his hand across his chin, getting a droplet of his blood in the process, and then he did a quick set of hand seals. "Not quite." And just as he slammed his hand on the ground he spoke. "Kuchio's no jutsu, Ohamaguri." And then a giant poof of smoke erupted, blanketing the entire area, causing Kenshin's eyes to narrow as the waterway's walls groaned and cracked whilst a giant shadow soon started to be seen. Soon enough the smoke lessened to reveal a giant clam plopped right in the middle of the entire waterway itself. The Mizukage stood atop of the summon as he now looked down at his foe with an impassive expression. "Now let's see you get past this, my greatest collaboration jutsu, the Shinkiro no Genjutsu, against you, Uzumaki Kenshin, wielder of the Shi no Kanshoku," he said before the clam opened its shell before it released a vast steam into the area. The Uzumaki head remained impassive before he glanced behind him to see the rest of his clansmen dealing with the last of the Kiri forces, that is until the steam started to flood his vision. A game of illusion? Really, now are you that desperate? Soon enough multiple mirages of Maida appeared around him, each of them finishing a set of hand seals of their own. "Sweden. Teppadama." One of Mita's mirages declared before his cheeks swelled before he shot out a ball of water 5 times the size of a regular-sized tree. "Kaden. Enden." Another shouted before he shot a bullet of fire down at the head of the Uzumaki. "Doden. Doryuden." The third sounded before a giant dragon's maw formed from the ground before it shot forth. Soon enough more mirages started to appear, and as the jutsus closed in on him Kenshin just gave a sigh. He knew Maida didn't have fire nor earth affinity, and he was only able to use these other jutsus because he was utilizing his jutsu to its fullest. Since it fell under the yin release he was able to manipulate the mind to think he could, but in reality it all just an illusion. A very realistic illusion, but an illusion nonetheless. "I'm not in the mood for these games, Maida." Clapping his hands he man declared. "Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Uzu o Makikomu." Then weaving his hat forth a small rip in the air formed before it became bigger until a giant swirling vortex appeared where the inside of it was a pitch-black void-less space. The second it started to swirl, the steam, jutsus and all started to get pulled in. While it did, Kenshin slammed his other hand on the ground. Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, Kumonoami. And from there a white spider-like web spread out from his hand which stretched out all over the ground and walls and ceiling. It went further and further as the vortex absorbed the mist that seemed to never end, and soon the white web tensed before it turned crimson. Got you. Vanishing Kenshin appeared directly above the clam's shell before he slammed his hand on the summon's body, and as his eyes glared down at the surprised Maida he ushered in his next technique. Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Haite. From his hands a white glow formed before it soon enveloped the giant clam. Before it was glowing white soon enough the giant clam went poof with its form disappearing from the mortal world, and back to its own realm. Landing on his feet Kenshin didn't give Maida the time to recover before appeared in front of him before slamming his fist into face. Grabbing him by the head before he could fly back he slammed his face into his knee before slamming his elbow into his ribcage. He reared his left leg before kicking him in the abdomen sending flying on the other side of the waterway causing him to slam into the wall. Gah! Maida puked up blood as he tried to wrench himself out of the wall only for Kenshin to beat him to it by grabbing him by the scruff of his neck. The redhead pulled him out of the wall before drop-kicking him to ground causing it to crater whilst Maida's strangled cry was muffled by the ground. Hazuka Maida, Nadaim Mazukage you're lucky I'm only prolonging your suffering, he said as put his foot on the man's head, and applying pressure he watched as the man tried in vain to pull his foot off. However you have information that I want, and you will give it to me, or I will personally see to it that your village is sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Am I clear? He said as he applied more pressure to his head. Why yes, I get it. Though shameful Maida didn't feel like having his head pop like a melon under Kenshin's foot. Speak then, how did you, Kumo and Iwa get information past our defenses? Who relayed that information? He said as he lightened the pressure. It was Hiruzen, Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage. He met with all of us, and gave us the details of bypassing your defenses. He never gave a reason why, only the details, and in exchange we would hold a ceasefire with Konoha. He said, causing Kenshin to scowl. His brow went void of any other emotion. He clenched his hand causing his knuckle to pop before blood started to leak from his shaking fists. I see. His face went impassive before he let off on Maida before he grabbed him by the scruff of his neck before lifting him up to eye level. Seeing as you've given me what I wanted, I have no further use of you. Buting you would be a mercy. Leave in shame Hazuka Maida, flee and cling to what you have seen today at what the Uzumaki are capable of doing now. Get out of my sight, he said before he threw the cage aside causing him to hit the floor before he regained his footing. He watched as the man stared at him for the briefest moment before he looked to see his Kiri shinobi all slaughtered. His head soon fell in defeat before he used a quick Mizu Shunshin causing him to disappear into a vortex of water. Seeing him gone Kenshin looked down at his hands, and once he saw the wounds on his hands caused him to give a sigh. So it's true, Konoha has betrayed us, the alliance is broken. Hiruzen Sarutobi got that information from only one source, but she would never hand it over willingly. Add the fact that now makes 4 of the 5 major shinobi villages are our enemy. It would seem the Uzumaki clan will be going to war once more. Then he felt a jolt of pain from his hands causing him to wince. He'd used his unique ability after so long without much need. After being out of battle for so long he hadn't felt the need to use the ability, and yet if it could cause him pain from even this battle meant only one thing. He needed to get back in shape. There had been a reason Maida had called him the Shi no Kanshoku or Death Touch, and that was because like every other Uzumaki each one is born with an unique ability. It was like a mutation in their own chakra. His Masumi Kushina was born with the ability to conjure chakra chains, and many others in history had awakened their own unique ability. His other daughter Urza had yet to awaken hers, but he felt it would be soon. However, his was based on touch, or as he liked to call it, transmute his chakra on everything he touched, and after learning how to master it he was able to combine it with his Fuinjutsu armory without the need for hand seals. He was even able to delay a jutsu to give him time to reach out to his target, which could make his attacks close range, mid or even long range. However, the true reason he was called what he was is because when he was young, with a simple touch of his hand, Kenshin could his opponents, cripple them, or even seal them into a void of absolute darkness. It was why he had been so feared and respected by the elemental nations. And it was a major reason as to how he was able to off the Kage clan so long ago. Shaking his head of those morbid thoughts, Kenshin looked upon the damage of the waterway, and could only smile as the repairing seals did its work, as the damage soon repaired themselves. He looked to see his clansmen injured, but fine from the looks of it. Then he felt one of his personal guards appear at his side, causing him to go impassive. Report. Hi. The enemy is in full retreat, and those left behind are being dealt with as we speak. Any on the waterway have been neutralized, he said, making Kenshin nod. Casualties? None, sir. However, there is one thing you should note. It's concerning the blonde man from before, he said, causing Kenshin to glance at the shinobi with a raised eyebrow. Yes, what of him? Shamefully, he'd nearly forgotten about the Oda amidst the chaos. Here his shinobi squirmed a little before finally speaking. He slaughtered the entire main invasion force, sir. The fleet that was to invade us is now burning away atop of the sea. It's also reported that he defeated the Sandaime Raikage and Nadaime Tsuchikage as well, he said, causing Kenshin's eyes to widen in shock. He'd admit in the deep recesses of his mind he'd thought the Oda was merely bluffing when he said would take out the entire invasion force, but after hearing that he had not only accomplished that task, but also took out the two legendary shinobi Z, the Sandaime Raikage, and Mu, the Nadaime Tsuchikage, all single-handedly, meant only one thing. The mysterious Odas truly were a very fearful and powerful clan, of that I no longer doubt, and the fact this man did all that by himself, truly astounding. We would have surely lost if he had not defeated those two cages. Is that all? He said. No, the man is waiting for you back at the cage tower. We just await your orders, Uzukage-sama. Kenshin just gave nod before speaking. Very well. Have our censors scour the rest of the village and outside for any further shinobi, but go ahead and end the evacuation. Tell villagers it is safe, but tell my family to meet me at the cage tower. Now go. The man bowed his head in acceptance. Hi. Vanishing in a shunshin, Kenshin soon left in a shunshin as well. It was time he met with the savior of both his daughter and his clan, and gave him what he promised. Then he could start preparing his clan for the worst. Uzumaki Kenshin could not have seen a far better sight than now, as he stood within his office looking through his window so that he could oversee the village of Uzushiogakure, the home of the Uzumaki clan itself. It had been merely hours since the failed invasion brought down by the combined forces of Kumo, Iwa, and Kiri. Thankfully, so far no damage or casualties inside the village have been reported. Only the outer edges had any sort of aftermath activity. Just stragglers from the enemy force they hated on the spot. No more mercy was to be given, an order he personally made to his men. The only reason he spared Maida was to send him back with his tail between his legs, so that he could be the result of what will now happen to anyone that crosses the Uzumaki clan. With how things were to go now, Kenshin had to start preparing his clan for the worst, but first he had something a bit more important to deal with. And it was with that thought he turned around to see possibly the savior of his clan from total extinction. Oda Naruto stood before him in all his noble bodily stature, and any wounds or burns many would have thought he would have received after his battle against main invasion force and the Sandaime Raikage and Nadaime Tsuchikage were not even seen. Truly he looked as if he hadn't just fought an entire army and two legendary cage shinobi. Truly remarkable. Shaking his head, Kenshin addressed the man. Sorry to have you wait like this, but before anything I would like formally introduce you to my family, and myself. Something I couldn't do beforehand because of what transpired prior. The blonde merely glanced at him before giving him a nod. However, the blonde's mind was on other things which transpired during his fight with the two cages, Z and Mu. At the time he was about to finish them, but there was something else that had caught his attention, something that sent a sense of familiarity through him. And being asleep for Kami knows how long, he no longer cared for anything else than to hone in on what made that tremor within the fabric of the spiritual realm. Yet to his annoyance it vanished before he could hone in on its location. From there he didn't feel the need to waste any further time on the two cages, and merely left them be. However, should they cross sights again, there would not be a second chance. So, you're the man that saved Kushina Ne-chan. A voice spoke out, causing Naruto merely glance to his side to see three women sitting on a couch against the wall. He looked to see it was three redheads with matching similarities that made them easily related. The first one he easily recognized was the ever-excitable Kushina, but it seemed she was wearing better garments than what she was when they arrived. However, it was the other two that caught his gaze. The first was a girl that looked everything like Kushina besides a few differences, with her hair being a scarlet shade with bold brown eyes. The girl was dressed in the Uzumaki Kunoichi garb, but in addition she carried a small sigil on her form that showed her a part of the clan head family. The second, however, was a woman that Naruto could easily see was Kushina's mother just from the sheer fact that her eyes were the exact same shade as Kushina's. Plus the same facial features, and slight round eyes were a dead giveaway. Still, as the three came inside, and as the door closed behind them, he saw Kushina seem to find his gaze, causing her face to light up before she looked away. Slightly bemused at her reaction, he felt a gaze on him, making him look to see Kushina's look like seemingly staring at him, and if she could through him. However, she was unprepared for her eyes to meet his, because as soon as her brown eyes met his smoldering azure orbs, the scarlet-haired girl was left stricken on the spot. For Urza Uzumaki, when she along with her mother and sister came in to see their father after being escorted from the shelters, she was long in wait to see the man that saved her sister. So when she found her gaze from her father, and onto the strange man with him, she found her sole attention on him. The way he looked seemed so foreign to what she had seen amongst her clansmen with his robes, but just from looking at him Urza could feel that he was someone to take note of, and on some level she felt the need to mind herself. That confused her, but when she found her gaze meet smoldering azure orbs of the blonde man, she felt her entire world stop for the briefest second. Urza could see the sheer intensity his eyes held, while unintentionally or not they gave off a feeling of a cold gaze that sent a shiver up her own spine. Those eyes, they're scarier than Ka-san's. Kurara, however, studied Naruto for the briefest moment, and while her two daughters seemed to not catch it, she did. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the man's garb and clothing, the way he held himself, and the air of nobility that came off was staggering. There wasn't an ounce of arrogance nor pride that she could see or feel from the blonde-haired man, but she felt a bit uneasy from the sight of his blue eyes. Being the matriarch of the Uzumaki clan, she had seen many nobles in her day, but this man was a different kind, a much different noble from the ones she's ever seen. Plus she could feel the way he held himself, which was that of a calm and composed warrior that seemed relaxed, but the slightest act of aggression would be met with brutal and lethal force in the blink of an eye. Her eyes trailed the man's appearance, remembering every last detail, from the unique shade of his bright golden spiky hair, and smoldering azure eyes to his unique garments. Certainly he fit the description of the man who saved his daughter, but he didn't look over the age of maybe 20, 21 at the most, and yet Kurara felt this man held more wisdom than even her own grandfather. But then there's that mark he bears, she thought as her eyes briefly rested upon the sigil on Naruto's clothing. Naruto just eyed the one who spoke to him, the scarlet-haired Kushina look like, who seemed to freeze upon eye contact before he just nodded her way. You would be correct in your assumption. He led on, causing the girl to stand up before him, pushing down any sense of nervousness she felt prior. She looked up at him with bold brown eyes, with her hands placed on her hips. The name is Uzumaki Urza, Kushina Ne-chan's sister, she declared, which only made Naruto give a small nod, already seeing the clear similarities she and Kushina shared. The blonde merely looked at the girl, and once again saw that she too was indeed much like her sister. She didn't fear him nor shy away because of his presence, and even though he could see some inkling nervousness, she was still able to stand before him without an ounce of fear. True, she hadn't witnessed what he could do, but still an admirable aspect nonetheless. Kushina just slapped her hand over her face, trying in vain to hide her embarrassment from what her sister had done, and in front of her savior nonetheless. Her eyes glanced to see her mother giving her an amused expression causing her cheeks to flush a deeper shade of red. She just knew her mother was going to pick at her about this. I see it as a pleasure, he said, giving a small nod to the girl who blinked at his words before she saw his gaze fall on her, causing her cheeks to light up before she looked away. However, Karara caught it, and could merely chuckle at the shyness before she took a step forward, garnering the attention of the blonde man. And I'm Uzumaki Karara, matriarch of the Uzumaki clan and mother to Kushina and Urza. It's a pleasure to finally meet the man who saved Kushina, so for that you have my utmost gratitude, Naruto-san, she said with a bow. Naruto merely met her bow with a nod of his head. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Uzumaki-san, and as for your daughter, she has done me a service, and I chose to repay that in full. Therefore, by saving her, and returning her home, my debt to her is paid in full, he said to the Uzumaki family's confusion, but Kushina seemed to understand a bit as a small smile formed on her face. Turning his gaze on Kenshin, he spoke, now Uzukage-san, I do believe you promised me something in return for helping you, and your clan against the forces. You know about my clan, and even mentioned a tablet, care to explain? He asked, causing Kenshin to give a sigh whilst his wife glanced between Naruto and her husband in confusion. Urza and Kushina seemed just as confused as their mother, but they remained silent due to the tension rising within the room. Finally, Kenshin looked toward Naruto, and nodded. I did, and I intend to honor my promise, but first, here he snapped his fingers, causing his guards to appear. Waving his hand in dismissal, he spoke, leave us. Hi, Uzukage-sama. They vanished, leaving the family and Naruto alone in the office. The Oda raised an eyebrow when Kenshin wordlessly walked over to a vacant wall on the left side of his desk. Pulling his hand up, he bit his thumb before swiping his blood on the wall, and then a seal appeared glowing a bright red color before it shimmered away as the sound of a distant lock being unlocked rang out. Looking over his shoulder, he nodded towards Naruto. Follow me, Oda Dono, he said, causing the man to nod. Karara, on the other hand's eyes snapped wide open when she heard the name Oda. She snapped her gaze directly toward the blonde with a sense of bewilderment, and even disbelief. That is until she saw Kenshin looking at her with dead serious eyes. Karara, bring Kushina and Urza as well, with them being the heir to the clan they must learn of the secrets, and that of the history of our ancestors. He received confused glances from the two girls, but Karara masked her shock before giving a nod. Very well. Satisfied with that, Kenshin turned back to the wall as it slowly started to slide down into the floor, revealing a winding staircase that went down into the blackness. Now if you will follow me, I will show you all the Uzumaki know of your clan, Naruto-san. The blonde merely gave him a nod before he followed him in with the three redheads in tow. As they walked in, the wall slid back in place, hiding any signs of what just transpired. With Naruto as he traversed the deep staircase, he looked into the deepening darkness with narrowed eyes. When he took that first step onto the staircase, he felt that very same familiar dinging sound from before when he was fighting the two Kages. Only now it was getting stronger as he went deeper into the abyss. He could feel a sort of spiritual power as he went deeper within. It felt very familiar to him, but he couldn't put his finger on it. So where are we going exactly to, San? Kushina asked the same question that her twin had been thinking. However, it was Karara that answered her question. We're heading into the ancestral vault of the Uzumaki clan, where the heads of our clan of the past have all passed on their knowledge, history, techniques, and all that has happened in the past are recorded and stored into the vault. It is there where the next heir or heirs, when they are of the right age, are to go, as it is their birthright, and learn what it means to be the head of the Uzumaki clan. Entry into the vault is only allowed by the blood of the current clan head, and those of his blood-related kin, she said, causing Kenshin to nod. Yes, and though I wanted to keep this a secret for a bit longer, it seems I can't hold it out any longer. There are many secrets the clan left behind for us, some of which we still have yet to decipher, but I think that now we shall all learn one of our deepest secrets with Oda Dono here, he said, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow. However, he remained silent as they continued their trek into the abyss, but it was when he heard Kushina's sister Urza speak as she eyed him with a studious gaze. I have a question if you don't mind, what was the Oda clan Naruto-san? Asking him directly, causing him to look her way while her family seemed a bit tense at her words, Kushina more so, while Kenshin kept a sharp glance between her Masumi and the Oda. Naruto just kept his gaze securely on Urza, staring her down for the briefest of moments before he looked ahead as they stepped further into the darkness with the dimly lit torches lighting their path. The Oda clan, my clan, were a proud noble people that did not rely on this energy you call chakra, but on the separate energies that made up the two worlds. The world you, and the majority I would say know as the physical world, and the other world known solely as the spiritual world. We lived as nomads cut off from the rest of society, but we would tend to assist those that needed the help of our clan. He explained, only for Urza to frown in confusion. So your clan were like monks? She asked, causing Naruto close his eyes. In a manner of speaking, this response only intrigued her further by how he seemed to answer her, and then again avoid her question. Still, she had another question that when she spoke it gained the attention of her family. What about this spiritual world? What did you mean by that? What is it exactly? She asked, only to gain a cold chill when Naruto looked her way with an even colder glaze in his eyes than usual. To be blunt, I mean the realm of the dead, the spiritual world, as a place my clan was able to traverse and embrace because we welcomed the ideal of another world beyond the material one. This is why we were able to traverse the realm of the dead, or as others may call it, the underworld, city of the dead, even Makai in some cases. Now that is all I shall speak about this matter, he said, cutting off all other attempts for information. Still, what he said was enough to leave them all in a state of shock if what Naruto said was true, and that the Oda clan was potentially able to do the things he said, made them question. Who or what exactly was the Oda clan? Ancestral Uzumaki Vault. When the group reached the last step, they were greeted with a black, dimly lit chamber with two underground walls leading from the stairs directly a few feet from them. Ahead of them was another giant wall, only in the middle of it was giant set of doors crafted by a strange metal alloy due to the silvery shade the doors gave off. Even then, Naruto saw attached on the sides of the two doors were torches giving off a dimly lit orange glow which revealed the many set of seals placed upon the door. He couldn't even count how many seals were on it, but among them he did see one in particular in the dead center. The seal looked like any normal paper seal tag, but it glowed with a variety of different colors from red, green, yellow to even black, all of which were morphing into one another. He followed Kenshin whilst Karara stood with her two surprised daughters whilst the Uzukage stepped toward the door. Only the blood of the current clan head can open this door, and should anyone that wasn't a clan head try to breach this door, it would react with lethal force. This door hasn't been opened since my ceremony to becoming the clan head, but now things have become too dire for it to remain closed, he said before he walked closer to the door before he nicked his finger. Letting the blood flow around his hand, he placed his palm on the seal and uttered only one word. Kai. It was in that moment the seal reacted with Kenshin's touch as it slowly started to glow a bright white before the glow soon faded, only to have the seal meld into the door. From there the doors started to open, causing a great rumbling sound to occur within the room. As they opened, a deafening howl of wind circulated out from the doors, blowing into the faces of the 5 occupants, but 3 of the 5 remained impassive as they were greeted to another chamber where darkness itself seemed to engulf the very chamber. Upon entering with Naruto and his family in tow, Kenshin merely slammed his hand on the wall to his right before he spoke again. Kai. Then the doors behind them slowly closed, but while they did so the group was greeted with rows upon rows of torches lit up. The vastness of these torches kept going for what seemed like miles, lighting up the darkness before them until braziers hanging from the walls and the ceiling lit up. Finally he watched the row of torches stop nearly 3 miles ahead, only light up another set of torches that lit the other side of the wall. Then Naruto fully looked on the content of what lay within the vault. Woa! Kushina and Urza said in unison as the two stared up in sheer awe at what the two were seeing, and Naruto couldn't really blame the two girls, for even he was a bit impressed with what he saw. The Uzumaki truly had been holding everything they ever learned, created or gained over their many years of existing. Because shelves upon shelves filled to the brim with books and scrolls littered the many hallways. The sheer number of them was truly amazing to say the least, and that wasn't counting the number of artifacts all being held on pedestals among the walls to his left and right. So, what do you think, Oda Dono? Kenshin asked, only to receive a nod from the man. Impressive, Uzumaki-san. Your clan's knowledge has exceeded my expectations, because to gather this vast amount of knowledge is simply astounding, and a symbol to your clan's hard work and willpower. I'm honored to hear you say that, but please, all that the Uzumaki know of your clan are kept securely separate from my clan's own. This way, he said, leading the man, and the silent awe-stricken girls, and a silent Karara down into the vault's contents. Following Kenshin, Naruto kept his gaze steadfast, but that same dinging sound only got stronger, and now he could even pinpoint its location, leading his gaze to be directly toward the opposite wall to the entrance of the vault. He walked with Kenshin as the man led them up a staircase leading up to the wall. The wall itself seemed to be made out of the same material as the door had been, but walking to a particular wall, Naruto beheld the sight of yet another door, only this one held another seal. One of which Kenshin released, but this time stood aside, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow at the man. He saw this, and bowed his head respectfully. This door leads into the chamber of the Oda, where all that we know and have learned about your clan has been stored for all these years. It is only fitting for the first person to ever enter this chamber be you, Oda Dono, he said, causing Naruto to stare at the man before he looked towards the door for the briefest of seconds. That infernal dinging sound was so strong that if Naruto hadn't channeled his energy into his ears, they would have bled due to the sheer intensity of it, but now he knew that Kenshin spoke the truth, for whatever lay behind this door did belong to his clan. Because those of the spiritual realm would be able to hear this sound, and sense the many spiritual residue within. Still, it made him wonder as to why the Uzumaki had done this, why save his clan's knowledge, and whatever history they could find for safekeeping. What had caused them to do this, and for that matter, what had his clan done in his absence? Placing his palm on the door, he pushed it open and walked in, soon followed by the Uzumakis, and it was there Naruto's eyes' azure orbs surveyed the contents within the chamber. Unlike the Uzumaki's vault, what as within this one didn't even hold a quarter of the Uzumaki's knowledge, but that didn't matter to Naruto. His eyes swept across the chamber, counting at least 4 bookshelves holding a vast amount of dusty old scrolls that seemed to haven't been touched in ages. However, among them it was the object that lay in the middle of the chamber that caught his attention the most. It was a giant tablet standing on the floor. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, and 4 feet in width. However, age seemed to have never touched the tablet, due the stone not have crumbled away, and the text etched into the stone wasn't even faded in the slightest. It was this very text that covered the entire stone's smooth end. A dialect that confused Kushina and Urza, since it didn't look like anything they had seen in their teachings before. Kenshin seemed to catch what his eyes were on and decided to elaborate. This is the only artifact we have ever recovered from your clan. A tablet my great-grandfather Uzumaki Raijin had discovered in some ruins in Oni no Kuni, and when we discovered it to be connected to the Oda clan, we seized it as quickly as possible. However, we have never been able to decipher its contents or the message your clan left behind, and that leads me to believe that they left this message for someone, a possible descendant perhaps, but now that you have appeared, I know it was meant for you, he said. Naruto merely nodded before he walked up to the tablet, before he looked up at the very top of the scripture, and spoke. Even if you had mastered my clan's language, the Uzumaki clan would have never translated this, because this was meant for the eyes of the next head, he said, causing Kenshin's eyes to widen. Naruto ignored this in favor of reading the scripture, the text and the words left behind by his clan. Raising his hand, his index finger soon glowed a faint blue before his finger met in contact with the tablet before he closed his eyes. Then the texts glowed blue as well before they started to appear in his mind, relaying the message within his mind for him to see. I know you will find this, Naruto Dono, and that is why I shall leave these messages for you to find, and for you to learn of what's happened since your absence. I leave these tablets for your eyes only, as the next heir to the clan your eyes will be the only ones that can read this, of that I made sure of. Now I won't be able to fit all of this on one tablet, so there will be more where they are, even I don't know where they will end up with my death. But I know you will find them, but for now I leave this dire message for you so that you can learn of what's happened. When you entered the Shinsina-sumen, the elders tried to make sure the clan survived until your awakening, but with that traitor on the loose we could do nothing, as he destroyed all of what made us a clan. He's systematically lying us off like a snake's venom does to its prey. That is why after nearly 5 years nearly half of our original numbers had been off by either that traitor or his partner's forces. It was because of this the remainder of us fled our home, where I took everything including the most precious object to our clan with us. It was during this time we met with a tribe of nomads that specialized in sealing, and in return for helping us we helped them learn the ways of fighting. Their art of sealing proved useful for many of our knowledge to be kept locked away. We became allies, and hopefully that alliance still stands even now in whatever time you awaken in. But what is important for you to know above all else is that he is still out there, and with you gone he has done everything he can to us off, and take what is yours. You know of what I speak of, the most blessed artifact of our clan passed down from your father's father. I've done as you have asked, and hidden it away should this have ever happened, but if anything he has proven to be quite stubborn in his search for it. But I know that you will awaken, and keep it out of his hands, for it was meant only for your hands, Naruto Dono. I am running out of room, so I shall continue my message, and record all that's happened to the next tablet. Hopefully you find it by then, and search for what has been kept hidden away from the traitor's hands. This is farewell for now, my friend. Oda Kazuki, keeper of the Oda clan's records. Blinking, Naruto narrowed his eyes with the information given to him. His finger left the tablet, but all the information given to him made him just stand there as his mind soaked up everything he learned. The events prior to his eventual absence had been under rather stressful times, with the Jubi's awakening. His coming time for the Shinsina-sumen was nearing. There was no avoiding the sleep, as it was a sacred tradition for every future head to take. Shinsina-sumen was a sacred act where every heir to the Oda clan would come of age, and having proved their skill and prowess in the clan's ways would enter a state of deep slumber. This was in hopes they would leave their body on the spiritual level so that their soul could delve into the realm of the spiritual, and harmonize itself with the world of the spiritual. It was a rite of passage, and should you succeed in awakening from the slumber, then you would be downed as the next clan head of the Oda clan. The estimated time to awaken is never predetermined, but in most cases one would awaken after a few days, others weeks, and some rare cases a year or two. But there was risks, because in some cases many never woke up again. However, Naruto's mind raced on, trying to think up as to why he had been asleep for so long. He now knew that it had been more than a millennium since he went into slumber, but to sleep for so long while his clan was in peril. Why? It only felt like yesterday that I'd faced the Jubi. Did the sleep truly affect my sense of time for so long? He remembered delving into darkness, and linking himself with the real of spirits. His time in the realm was long, but to sleep this long. His hands twitched at the mention Kazuki's message, and the words he spoke of. His eyes turned soulless as he remembered of whom he spoke of. The traitor. He knew of the man Kazuki spoke of. After all, the man had betrayed his clan to a foreign element in the old days when the elemental nations was still new. Punishment for that was death, but the man proved elusive, like that of a ghost in many aspects. But as the blonde looked down at his hand, he clenched it till his knuckles popped, while his azure eyes hardened in a cold, merciless glaze. You escaped my grasp once, but you shall not do so again. Releasing his hand in its vice clench, he looked toward the stone again with a monotonous expression. You did your duty well, Kazuki. Now rest. In Naruto. Are you okay? Kushina's voice echoed within his ears, causing him to look to the side, where he saw Kushina standing at his side looking at him with a worried gaze. Deciding to ease her worry, he gave a nod before he looked back at the tablet that seemed drained in some manner. Yes, Kushina. I'm fine, just a lot to take in, so don't worry about me, he said, but he did notice the way she seemed to gaze at him longer than before, as if truly peering at him to see if he was lying. Her deep-seated worry for him confused him, but what surprised him was how this young girl was actually learning to quickly read him even better than most people in his time ever had. It was small, but she was learning nonetheless. Pushing these thoughts to the back of his mind, he turned toward Kenshin, and nodded. It would seem we have much to speak about Kenshin Uzumaki, he said, causing the man to frown in confusion. Uzumaki clan household. So what you read in that tablet specifies of an alliance made between your clan and the ancestors to the Uzumakis. Is that why our clan has always kept our vigilance for any information regarding the Odas? To keep all historic records of our ancient allies that even predate the time of our ancestors? Kenshin asked himself as he and his family were situated within his study. He looked to see Naruto standing out near the window as he looked out at the village. The trip from the vault to his household had been a quiet one since the village was still tense due to the attempted invasion, so they had been able to get to his home unhindered despite the looks they received from the one or two villager or clansmen that saw them. That would be correct in assuming that those same nomads were indeed the very same ancestors to your clan. Taking this into consideration, my clan seemed to have been the ones who taught your ancestors how to fight, and in return gave my clansmen shelter. He said before Kenshin seemed to massage his temples as the flux of information coming his way. To be honest, he shouldn't be surprised because he always had an inkling suspicion that the Uzumaki were allies with the Oda in way back, but to hear they had actually taught them out to fight in the old days was shocking even for him. Was there anything else on the tablet? Kenshin asked, only to have Naruto close his eyes and shake his head. No. Only affairs concerning my clan that I must fix on my own, he said, causing him to receive confused looks Kenshin and Kurara while he got a worried one from Kushina. Urza on the other hand frowned at his words. While the scarlet-haired tomboy was captivated by a great many things that had happened in the last few hours, her interest was growing minute by minute in not only this seemingly old clan that had been allies of her ancestors way back, but in the man who had saved her sister from a fate worse than death. Not that she would say it. Kenshin just nodded in respect. Very well, but the question now is, what will you do now? He only received a raised eyebrow from the blonde before he looked back out at the village. His gaze looking out in the far distance of the mainland. I must go and deal with this matter at hand. As he said this, he missed the look he got from his wayward redhead companion as she gazed at him with a look of worry. In all honesty, Kushina didn't want him to go, not after all he's done for her home and her family, just for him to up and leave. Plus the time she spent traveling with him back to her homeland had been possibly some moments she had ever had in her life. Granted, she didn't know as much about him as she did now, but still being with the blonde for all this time spawned a feeling of wanting him to stay. Still, her gaze fell as she realized one thing. He has no obligations to stay, nor should I be selfish about this. He does have his own goals to accomplish. Yet the pain stung at knowing he was going to leave. It felt like a dull pain at first, but hearing him actually say it felt like a dagger stabbed into her heart, and it twisted to deepen the pain. Kurara looked down at her daughter, and frowned at her state of quick depression. It was small, but she had noticed it when Naruto said those words. No, it was before then she had noticed that she was nervous about the inevitable, but she saw her flinch, and looked down in sadness at his response. A small sad smile crossed Kurara's features as she looked down at her downtrodden daughter. In truth, she knew right when her daughter came bursting through the door, running into her arms, telling of her of what happened, that the blonde Oda had not only made a deep impression on Kushina. He had done much more than that. He'd become very important to Kushina in such a small amount of time. She dare say her daughter was beginning to become smitten by him. Then again, it's too soon to tell, but she is showing the signs. But for now, let your Ka-chan help you out, my little Masumi, she thought as she gazed at her daughter with a loving gaze. Then she turned her gaze toward the silent Naruto before she spoke. Excuse me, Naruto Dono. She spoke, causing the man to look her way. Yes, Uzumaki-san. He asked only for the woman to smile as she gained confused looks from the others before she said only one thing that gained varied reactions. I would like to humbly ask of one small thing of you if you would be so inclined, she said with a sweet smile whilst Naruto looked at her with a keen eye. And that would be, he said only for Karara to point her hand to Kushina, causing her eyes to widen as she spoke. Take Kushina with you on this trip, she said, causing Kenshin's eyes to widen before he received a sharp look from his wife with the message being clear. We'll discuss this later. Urza on the other hand looked like a fish out of water, complete the expression and all as she looked from her mother to the silent blonde. Back and forth she went as she tried to comprehend what her mother had just suggested. Finally she felt her mind reboot only for her plop down on the couch as she came to realize something as her eyes went from her mother to her sister. Ka-chan is planning something again. Her mother had always been like that, a schemer, but this was new even for her. She then looked at her sister only for her brown eyes to widen when she saw Kushina's face looking positively shocked, so stumped that Kushina hadn't even uttered a single word. She waved her hand in front of Kushina's face before starting to poke, pull and pinch her cheeks before flicking her in the forehead. Nothing. Naruto on the other hand kept his gaze coolly on the still smiling woman, and while normally he would have outright denied the woman's request on the basis Kushina would only be a hindrance to his goal. However, that was not the case because Kushina was in fact not defenseless of that. He knew because while she was still in training he had seen her practicing as they traveled to Uzu no Kuni, and he could assume her skill was on par with some of the ranking shinobi called Genin or Chunin he'd heard about. Yes, she was young, but when he was thrown in the field he was much younger, and had done a lot more than she ever had at her age. The training he went through, the spars, battles, and eventuals he made for his clan had been for its safety. Plus, if he was being honest, he could sense an abnormal amount of potential in Kushina from the moment he saw her practice. That, and admitted, my wielder, you have gained a soft spot for young Uzumaki. An age-old voice boomed within his mind, causing him to frown slightly. Of all the times for you to contact me, it's now, and about this of all things, he voiced his thoughts in his inner world only to gain a chuckle in response. Details, what I'm more interested in is the fact you did not deny what I just said. Naruto could swear he heard amusement lacing his tenant's tone. Deciding not to respond, he kept his gaze on Karara for a moment before he turned his gaze toward Kushina. Why ask me this? Why ask me to take your daughter and heiress to the Uzumaki clan with me? A trip that will undoubtedly be dangerous to her life. What makes you trust me with her life, Uzumaki-san? He asked only for him to gain a small tick in his brow when he saw her smile widen. Because for one, even if you weren't an Oda, you saved my home from devastation, meaning you are a man I can trust with my daughter's safety. 2. You saved her life, and even brought her back home no matter the circumstances, still speaks well about your character. And most importantly 3, I think she would do very well to travel with you for a bit, she said, seemingly point out 3 major points that seemed to prove that she made her point. Still Naruto remained silent before he looked towards Kushina, bringing his full attention on her, and seeing how she felt his gaze on, and she looked up at him only for her face to turn beet red, he spoke. Still, this is her choice to make, nor will you make that decision for her, so what do you say, Kushina? Addressing the redhead, causing her to shake from her shock-induced stupor only to find herself again stricken under Naruto's azure gaze. Being rooted on the spot, Kushina for once didn't even know what to say. While she was still shocked at her mother's proposal, and secretly thanking her for it, she was still surprised that Naruto, her savior, the cold merciless blonde, was actually considering it, and with her own approval at that. Still feeling the full weight of this, Kushina looked at her family, her contemplative father, her smiling if a bit scheming mother, and expecting twin sister. If she accepted, she would be leaving them behind temporarily, though it still meant she would be willing to leave them to travel with Naruto. To travel with him again caused a feeling of happiness to swell up in her chest, but at the same time nervous to the unknown. Then she looked to Naruto before her violet eyes went up into his azure orbs, and right then as she looked into his eyes, Kushina decided. I'll go, she said as a fierce fire of determination burst forth in her eyes. A sight that brought a smile to her father. Her mother only smiled even more whilst Urza seemed to be happy with her choice. She looked a bit sad, but quickly hid it well. But it was Naruto that saw the glow the most, and for the first time in a long while a small smirk crossed his features. His eyes lit up slightly at seeing the amount of drive the young girl was giving off in her eyes. It was deep and intense, something he hadn't seen since. Remind you of someone. His inner tenant seemed to read his thoughts, and Naruto just kept silent. Clap. Well, since that is decided, Kushina, go pack your essentials. Naruto Dono will meet you at the gate. Urza, go and help your sister if you would be so kind, Kurara proclaimed, causing the two girls to nod before they raced off into the household. From there the last remaining three were left with silence before Kenshin spoke. If you could have my daughter back in 3 months from now, that would be greatly appreciated, Naruto Dono, he asked, getting a raised eyebrow from the man whilst Kurara giggled into her hand. What he means to say is that he wants to have Kushina back in at least 3 months' time so she can start her training in more of the Uzumaki clan's techniques. Seeing as she is in the clan's eyes the heiress, she and Urza will be needing more advanced training as they mature. However, until then I don't see why she can't travel with you for a bit, she said. Naruto merely gave a nod before Kenshin reached under his desk before pulling out a spare rolled-up parchment. Handing it to Naruto, he spoke, seeing the confusion forming on his face. Now with that settled, I would like to give you a map, since I am sure the elemental nations has changed since your time, he said, making Naruto raise an eyebrow before he took the map from the Uzukage's hand. Unfurling the map, his eyes scanned the parchment, giving it a once-over, taking in each point of all the countries from Uzu no Kuni to the 5 major countries. He viewed the minor ones, and seen as a matter of fact that many countries outnumbered the major ones like Hai no Kuni or Kaminari no Kuni. Still, overall, looking at the sheer scale, the land he once knew had indeed changed from just the sheer change in structure, or at least from what he was seeing on the map. It was moderate, but enough to change many things. Still, he rolled it back up, and put it away inside his robes before he looked towards the two. Very well. I shall make my departure as soon as Kushina meets me by the gate. And with that said, he turned and walked towards the door. Only as his hand went to grab the knob, he heard Kenshin speak. Naruto Dono, while I know you are more than capable, please make sure Kushina comes back. We nearly lost her once, so please, as a father, take care of her, will you? He asked. While he didn't know what his wife was planning, Kenshin was already thinking up the pros of allowing Kushina to go along with his wife's suggestion. Her safety was a priority, that much can be assured, but protecting the clan was important, and the village was still tense after all that's happened, so to assure Kushina's safety he was all for to let her go along with Naruto. If he were any other man he would have declined, but he knew Naruto was capable. Not only was he powerful if he was able to do what he did to the main invasion force, but also he was an ally of the Uzumaki, a friendship held between his and Naruto's clan that went so deep that it went back to the time of his ancestors. If there was anyone he could trust with his daughter's safety, it was the blonde himself. Not only that, but with her out of the village, it decreases the chance of Konoha asking for her or any potential leak in the village getting out that she was in the village. With her traveling with Naruto, it both gives me a chance to root out any leaks in the village's defense system, and deal with Konoha as a whole, was his thoughts. Not knowing this, his wife was thinking entirely different matters concerning this event. Had he known what her intentions were, he may have been a bit more hesitant to allow this. The blonde decided to speak. You have my word as an Oda, Uzumaki Kenshin, that no harm shall befall the girl. Now I must be off. Gaining a nod from the two, he opened the door, and left, leaving the two Uzumakis alone, only for Kenshin to glance toward his wife with a studious gaze. Okay, Kurara-chan, what are you planning it now? He asked, only to receive a small slap on the head from his wife. He frowned as she gave a soft giggle. Her violet eyes peered down at him with a look he knew all too well from their youth. Mischief was clear as day in those eyes, and it only caused a sinking feeling in his stomach from the way she smiled at him. Nothing, dear, nothing at all, just helping out our little Kushi-chan, she said, causing Kenshin to raise an eyebrow at his wife. Help her how? But to his annoyance, his wife just sauntered off while twirling her finger in the air. Oh, nothing, just giving her a little push in the right direction is all. And thankfully Karara thanked how dense her husband could be at times, she could literally feel his confused eyes staring into her back. Still, she wondered how things would progress between her Masumi and the blonde Oda during this trip. Uzushiogakure's gate. Kushina was literally beaming with excitement as she stood side by side with her blonde traveling companion. While she had been still surprised at what was happening, she was coming to terms with the fact that she was actually going to be able to travel the elemental nations, and with Naruto, which only made it all the better for her. Hell, she wanted to hug her mother fiercely for giving her this chance. She was fine with smiling as wide as she could at our equally smiling mother. She'd packed her essentials in a variety of storage scrolls which she put into her backpack, but she still replaced some of her clothing with the Uzu Kunoichi standard. Like her sister, she wore similar gear, but instead of long-sleeved shirt she wore a short-sleeved with a black long-sleeved shirt underneath. She wore black pants that went down to her black shinobi sandals, while strapped her right hip was a kunai shuriken pouch, while on her left hip was a variety of 6 scrolls strapped to her hip in a leather holster. Finally, proudly tied around her forehead was the Uzushio headband in all its glory, securely fashioned on her forehead. Her hair fell down her back as usual, with her 2 trademark twin bangs framing her face. A trait she shared with her twin sister. Overall, Kushina looked ready and rearing to go, but she stayed put as she said her goodbyes to her family while Naruto stood off to the side looking out from the village, keeping his gaze firmly out on the mainland. You better be careful out there, Nae-san, and try not to get yourself into too much trouble, okay? Her sister said, causing Kushina to pout at her smirking sister before pinching her cheeks, causing her yelp. Shut up, TT Ebane. She continued to pull her Urza's cheeks only for her hands to be slapped away before Urza surprised her by giving her a hug. With her eyes going wide at the contact, Kushina looked down as Urza hugged her sister for all she was worth, and it was there she heard her sister speak. Please be safe, Kushina. Nay, I'll miss you. Urza spoke with her words carrying a soft tone of worry for her sister. Kushina just smiled before wrapping her arms around her sister. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Worry about getting stronger till the next time we meet, okay? She felt her sister nod into her shoulder before Urza pulled away, only to give a silent glare directed to the blonde as if scrutinizing him. Kushina saw this and sighed at her sister's action. Perhaps Urza was a bit more protective of her than she first thought. Kenshin just put his hand on top of Urza's head while he gave a respectful nod to the blonde who seen it from the corner of his return before looking to his daughter. Now Kushina, I want you to take this as a chance to learn all you can, and take this as a lesson to learn of the world we live in. All may not look as it seems from first glance, so take this as a chance to learn, and grow as a respectful kunoichi, understand? He said, causing Kushina to look up at her father with a serious expression before she gave a nod. I will too, san. She said with a nod while her eyes glowed with that same intense drive that even now Naruto saw to be extremely nostalgic. Then Karara came up before pulling her daughter in for a hug, but it was when she bent down to her ears that Karara spoke, so her words were only heard by Kushina. And while you do what your father suggested, Masumi, don't forget to find the time to have fun. Masumi, life is too short to not experience a bit of fun. So take the time to enjoy this trip with Naruto-san, okay? She said with a wink, causing Kushina to blink at her mother as she tried to comprehend her words. That was when she realized what she was implying, causing her face to flush a deep cherry red before pulling away as if she was burned while looking away from not only her smirking mother, but especially Naruto. Oh, she did not want Naruto to see her face right now. Stupid Ka-san, why won't she stop saying such embarrassing things? Was her thoughts, but still her mother's words were now teasing and haunting her at the back of her mind. Like an annoying gnat that wouldn't stop flying around you. Taking a chance, her eyes glanced to Naruto only to look away when she found him looking her way with a raised eyebrow. Feeling everything was settled, the blonde turned to Kushina. Are you ready to go? His voice seemed to cause her to tense before she dared to look his way before giving a meek nod. Hi. With that, Naruto nodded before he started to walk away, followed by Kushina, leaving her family to look at their backs as they traversed into the forests and out of the village. This time for a good amount of time, with one of the Uzumaki clan's heirs traveling with the heir to the Uzumaki's oldest allies. Truly a unique sight if someone besides the family knew of Naruto's status. Still, this presented a question: what will happen now with the likes of Naruto Oda unleashed upon the elemental nations after so long in deep slumber? No one could tell. Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure, sat behind his desk with his fingers intertwined whilst he stared from beneath the rim of his cage hat. His sharp brown eyes, hardened from the years of warfare, pierced into the other two pairs of eyes belonging to the two men that now stood in front of his desk. Though he sat composed with little to no abnormality in his posture, one with the trained eye would see the tense of his muscles, the twitch of his hands, and guarded way he held himself. He was a Kage that had been through wars since he was a child, and as such learned to always keep up his guard. But right now Hiruzen was in a state of annoyance. It had been little over a week since the attempted invasion on Uzushiogakure with the combined forces of Iowa, Kiri and Kumo, and the news of their failure had reached the vast reaches of the elemental nations. Naturally, many people had believed that the land would have been decimated under the combined force of 3 supernova shinobi villages, but it seems like the Uzumaki clan had once again proven history correct in achieving the impossible. They had come out alive, or so the two men standing before him had reported, but right now he was more interested in the report of their mission. And he was not pleased with what they had to say. Can either of you please explain to me how 2 of my top infiltration experts could fail in a simple retrieval mission of one young girl? How could you 2, my own students, fail in retrieving Uzumaki Kushina amidst the attack on her home? He said, questioning the 2 men. His eyes went, the first one of whom wilted under his gaze. Still, he felt not sympathy for the 2. They had failed in a crucial mission that would have benefited Konohagakure immensely, but to hear they had failed was something he not expected nor wanted to even hear in the first place. The first man was tall with a muscular build. He wore the standard Anbu uniform, which consisted of a long sleeves black t-shirt and black pants with the ends tucked into his black shinobi sandals, where white medical tape was wrapped around to secure them in place. In addition was a gray chest guard with gray shoulder guards that covered the mont's entire upper torso. He looked to be in his 20s with tanned skin. He had long spiky white hair that fell to his mid-back. Black eyes stared nervously back into the stony orbs of Hiruzen Sarutobi, while red line markings dripped down from the bottom of his eyes, and finally he had the beginning of a small wart on his nose. The second man was much different to his fellow companion. While he wore the same uniform, it was a lot more loose due to the mont's body being much more thin. He had the body of agile fighter that relied more on flexibility and speed than his fellow shinobi. His skin, on the other hand, was an unnatural shade of pale to the point it looked unhealthy to the stark white tone his skin looked to be. He had long waist-length straight black hair, while his most unique feature was his eyes being amber with his pupils being slits stared back at Hiruzen in a bored fashion, hiding the small feeling of nervousness as he stared into the eyes of the man given the moniker as the Kami no Shinobi. The first man seemed to gather his bearings. Well, you see, me and Orochimaru were sneaking into the underwater system, but somehow we triggered something in the Fuinjutsu defense grid because an alarm went off, and then we were flushed back into the sea. By the time we awoke, we washed up on the shore of the mainland and the battle for Uzushio ended, he said, making Hiruzen look at him for a few seconds before nodding. I see. Then he turned his attention to the other man named Orochimaru. And what about you, Orochimaru? What about your secondary objective with finding out any information regarding the Uzumaki clan or any unusual abnormalities in their defenses? He asked, only to raise an eyebrow when Orochimaru hesitated to answer that, as until he seemed to straighten himself out, and told him bluntly. No, I could not, sensei, because of one glaring flaw when I sent out my snakes to infiltrate through the water, and into the land when the whirlpools were disrupted by the Kiri forces. I didn't hear from them until I woke up, and come to find out I figured out why. When he received a raised eyebrow in response, he continued. All of Uzu no Kuni was surrounded in what looked like a barrier of fire. It was only for an instant, sensei, but me and Jiraiya saw it. I can only theorize most of my snakes were incinerated by the flames by getting in contact with them or just by being near them, he said, causing Hiruzen's eyes to widen exponentially. A giant barrier of fire to surround the entire landmass of Uzu no Kuni. No one, not even the likes of Kaden masters such as Uchiha Madara himself, was capable of doing such a thing. Yet to hear this was a shock, and made him wonder as to what could have caused such an event to appear. I see, but you said most of them did. Any survive? Orochimaru nodded, not surprised his sensei caught on to that. That would be correct. One of the water snakes I sent out had relayed to me concerning the events with what happened to the main invasion force, and from what I was told it would seem the Uzumaki clan have more ties than we actually thought. Because from what was reported by my snake, one single man stood between the combined forces of Kiri, Iwa and Kumo and Uzushiogakure, he said, causing Hiruzen to frown in disbelief. No one man could stand alone against an entire army of that size unless perhaps it was his sensei Hashirama Senju or Uchiha Madara, but they were legendary and even considered monsters even amongst himself. Continue, he ordered. Yes, well, unfortunately my snake could not get a description of the man because it had to flee when he started his attack, and that was because the sea floor had been sliced in half, causing a mass rupture in the sea. That was why it had to flee, and that was all I could get, sensei, he said, while Hiruzen once again felt shock flood his system. The entire seafloor, sliced in half. What kind of being could accomplish something like that? To destroy the sea floor was different, but to slice it down in half, and cause a rupture in the sea was something else entirely. The only thing Hiruzen knew that could do something like that was the Sanbi, the three-tailed giant turtle, and the nine-tailed Kyubi no Kitsune, and even then neither of those two Biju could actually cut through the sea floor like Orochimaru had just told him. If anything, it sounded as if a sword had cut through it. But that was just impossible. No mortal man could do such a thing. Still, he left his mind open to the possibility of it, no matter the sheer absurdity of it. I see, this is unexpected, he muttered before he glanced to see the white-haired man shift where he stood, and seeing the look on his face, Hiruzen waved his hand. You have something to say, Jiraiya, he said, noticing the way the man seemed to shift in his posture. Decades of training had taught him to read people's movements, and by just looking at his student he could tell the man wanted to speak his mind. Jiraiya just nodded before he spoke in a low tone of voice. Was this right, sensei? I mean to do this to the Uzumaki clan. Didn't Tsunade's clan have a long-standing alliance with them? Why break it now? Was it even a good idea to betray them like this, sensei? He asked his doubt for what his sensei was doing. Though he had been called the Dobi of his class and generation, he had known about the alliance the Senju clan held with the Uzumaki clan, and it's lasted for nearly a century. Hiruzen sighed, and glad he'd whisked his guards out of the room before he spoke. This was after all a classified mission that wouldn't be recorded in either of his students' records. Leaning back, Hiruzen fished out his pipe before dipping some tobacco inside before lighting it with a small Kaden jutsu. Inhaling the sweet smoke, he exhaled before looking towards Jiraiya. Jiraiya, we're in a world of war where the strongest survive, and the weak perish no matter how much we choose to deny, hate or despise it. That is the number one law by which we all humans follow. It's a basic concept built in every human to help us learn to survive and adapt to our surroundings. We are at our very core animals that must follow our instincts to survive, and that is what I am doing for Konoha to survive this land of bloodshed. We needed the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi in our village to keep the village in the eyes of the other shinobi villages strong enough to pose a threat. Betraying the Uzumaki while taking the Kyubi Jinchuriki was the only plausible answer to cut off our connections to them in order to gain a ceasefire with Kiri, Iwa and Kumo, and also gain the Kyubi Jinchuriki back in our village as it was with the first, he said before taking a drag of his pipe. Exhaling, he spoke once again to his two silent students, but to answer your question, was it a good idea? No, it was not. But if it would keep Konoha strong so its people could flourish and the work my senseis Hashirama Senju and Tobarama Senju put forth in this village alive, then I would do it again in a heartbeat, he said, causing Jiraiya to frown before looking down. Orochimaru on the other hand gave a little scoff, causing him to catch Hiruzen's eye. Is there something you wish to say as well, Orochimaru? The man in question just gave his sensei a bored stare that danced with a small manner of crude amusement. Yes, actually, it would seem there is a flaw in your words, because the Uzumaki have today proven they are not weak. If they could do this amount of damage, and even survive for that matter, then they are truly a force to be reckoned with. They have also proven to have deeper ties to foreign alliances that we know nothing about in regards to this mysterious man on the battlefield whom seemed to have defended Uzu no Kuni, he said, causing Hiruzen to frown at the truth in Orochimaru's words. True, I didn't honestly expect them to survive, let alone someone unrelated to Konoha aid the Uzumaki clan, seeing as they are indeed well feared for their power in the field of Fuinjutsu. And that's not even counting the fact they are all well as a clan well talented in all fields of a shinobi. Still, it is unexpected to see that they hold ties and alliances if this mysterious man is anything to go by, because Hashirama Sensei never mentioned of other alliances the Uzumaki clan held. He trailed on with a frown. What else had the Uzumaki clan not told them? Orochimaru this time did scoff before speaking when he saw Hiruzen look at him. Don't forget, sensei, of the fact that when the Uzumaki clan learn about the breach in their defenses, they will tighten up on everything. This will make a second attempt near impossible, and seeing the incident with the first retrieval of the second Kyuubi Jinchuriki failed with our own shinobi abandoning her with the Kumo shinobi will leave them with a very bad impression of us with their leader. Hiruzen once again frowned, but nodded at the truth of Orochimaru's words. The incident in getting Kushina the first time had reached his ears by the very shinobi that abandoned her. Now they were nothing more than a pile of ashes for leaving their potential war asset in the hands of Kumo to save their own lives. The families of said shinobi were also threatened with punishment if they so much as breathed a word to anyone about it, but it would seem that had been for nothing, because he soon learned that the young girl proved to be even more elusive than he first thought. Because he'd soon learned from one of his spies in Nanamushi that they had seen the redhead traveling with an unidentified man where she presumably sailed back to Uzu no Kuni. Nanamushi being one of the very few port towns that had an outside Uzumaki ferryman that could transport other Uzumakis across the whirlpool defense system that surrounded Uzu no Kuni without being pulverized by the whirlpools. Then came the other portion of what Orochimaru said, and that actually made him feel a sliver of worry sprout in his gut. He knew the Uzumaki clan's current head by the name of Uzumaki Kenshin, the current Uzukage of Uzushiogakure and unofficial daimyo of Uzu no Kuni itself. He'd met the man merely once, but that had been enough for Hiruzen to learn that the man took protecting his clan, and especially that of his family above all else. He knew of his reputation, and quite frankly he wouldn't want to face him in battle unless absolutely needed, because he knew of what that man could do with the slightest touch of his hand. Still, it left to question what Kenshin would do. Even he with his other moniker as the professor couldn't think up a true response from Kenshin regarding to what happened in Uzu no Kuni. There were so many variables Hiruzen wouldn't be able to think up a plausible response Kenshin could make when the one he would actually make came at his very doorstep. He was a shrewd man, and one that even the Naras wouldn't want to face in a battle of wits. We will just have to wait and see how this plays out, he said, only for Jiraiya to speak after his short bout of silence. And what about Tsunade? What will we do about her? Right now she's in mourning over the passing of Mito-sama, and should she hear about this I fear she may react badly, he said, where Orochimaru in a rare moment agreed with his friend with a nod of his head. I have to agree, sensei. With the recent passing of Mito-sama, Tsunade's mental state is not in the best of conditions, and should she learn of what we did to her last living relatives she may act in a manner that may be treacherous to Konoha, he said, causing Hiruzen to frown, but he nodded nonetheless. Uzumaki Mito's passing had been a shock to all, but himself the woman had grown old, and to an age beyond what any other mortal could live up to, especially those that took up the lifespan of shinobi or kunoichi. However, Mito was not only the wife of his sensei Hashirama Senju, but she had also been a very fearsome and terrifying kunoichi in her day, and her talent in fuinjutsu was bar none. No one could argue the fact the woman was the only true fuinjutsu master, surpassed by none even amongst those of her own clan. She was the inspiration to generations of kunoichi from past to present, especially to Tsunade, her own granddaughter, that would explain why her death had hit his student so hard. The fact she had already lost her little brother Nawaki in an explosive trap during an Iwa incursion not too long ago didn't help matters at all. So it was prudent to keep aware of the fact that right now Tsunade was not in the right mental stability befitting a loyal kunoichi of Konoha, especially with her pedigree as the last living senju, to learn of what he did to try and benefit Konoha as a whole. Even if that had failed in the end, it was still prudent she not learn of what he did. Your worry for your teammate is well placed, but do not worry, Tsunade shall not know about this until she has recovered to a stable mental level so that she can understand the action I took was for Konoha to stay afloat. Now I have much work to go over, so you two are dismissed, he said, waving his hand. Satisfied with his answer, the two nodded. Hi, sensei. And the two vanished in a plume of smoke. With them gone, Hiruzen sighed. He took another drag of his pipe. You can come out now, he said whilst he turned his gaze to his left to see the corner of his office where the light was presented in the least, allowing the shadows to close in on that corner. It was there a figure melded out from the shadows until the figure was fully visible before Hiruzen's gaze. Who it was brought a relieved expression to Hiruzen's face. It was a figure cloaked in a full-body black trench coat that covered their body from head to toe with a hood that shadowed their head, while a white plain porcelain mask similar to his Anbu wore, but it bore not striking markings. However, that is what put this person out from the rest of his other Anbu. It was when the figure took a few steps out from the wall until he was standing in front of his desk, then he kneeled down before his Hokage. Looking down at the black-clothed Anbu, Hiruzen exhaled some smoke before placing his pipe away, then turning his gaze to the Anbu he intertwined his hands while his brown eyes gained a cold stony edge. Report. Abaka. The now named Abaka nodded before he stood up so that he was looking directly at Hiruzen. I was able to uncover the information you wanted regarding the situation in Iwa, Kumo and Kiri, and it would seem both the Nadaime Tsuchikage Mu and Sandaime Raikage Z are both in critical condition, while the Nadaime Mizukage Maida Hazuka is still in a state of recovery, but his physical wounds are far less than Mu or Z, but his mental wounds are far worse. I have come to find out that both Mu and Z were to lead the main attack on Uzu no Kuni, while Maida was to take a group of his most elite Kiri shinobi through the Uzumaki waterways. However, from the reports, Maida was confronted by Kenshin and the entire force of the Uzumaki's finest shinobi. While Mu, Z and the main invasion force were blocked from entering Uzu no Kuni by both a giant barrier of fire surrounding the isle, but also with just one man standing between them, the Anbu said with his voice muffled by his mask, but it was clearly a male.